ঠিক আছে?
হ্যাঁ।
ওকে।
Hello. Hi, guys. Thank you for joining the live stream. We have with us back Dr. Saumya Dey, who is an expert in all things history and apparently even sociological things somehow. I have to ask
No,
him
no, not at all.
how does he know so much sociology as well. And today we are going to discuss the eternal question: what exactly is caste? Are they simply status groups or not? What is the essence of caste? So, sir, first with your opening remarks. Then I have plenty of questions today. Hope I can get to them.
Okay, Niranjan. So, good evening to everyone present,
Good
joined on
evening, sir.
this live stream, and thank you for having me again. So, Niranjan, what I'll do is that I shall dwell a bit on the historiography of caste, that is, the various opinions advanced by various historians upon the origin of this institution and how it evolved and so on. And let me also throw in the caveat that I'm not an authority on anything. By the way, I'm just a student of historiography and, in general, of certain social and cultural theories. I'm still learning my stuff, and I shall continue to do that for the rest of my career and life. So, how did the institution originate? Once again, some very dominant hegemonic theories in this regard have been advanced by the Marxist historians. For example, Romila Thapar contends, she writes, that the institution originated because of a status differentiation in Aryan society. She believes in the Aryan invasion and the migration theories due to the unequal distribution of war booty. Now, what the Marxist historians say is that the Aryans or the Indo-Europeans who migrated to India were a warlike people. They were not originally agriculturalists, so they would raid other tribes and they would capture cattle and other booty. And when this captured cattle and war booty was brought to the tribe, it was distributed amongst the tribe. However, probably on account of the greater social authority that they wielded, the Rajanyas, who later became the Kshatriyas, and the Brahmanas cornered most of this booty, most of the cattle, most of the other booty. And hence, there was status differentiation in Indo-European or Aryan society, and the Varna Vyavastha began to emerge. This rudimentary Varna Vyavastha solidified to a greater extent, solidified more rather, when peasant production emerged in Indo-European or Aryan society. That is, a segment of the society, or the greater segment, the greater part of the society took to agriculture. And subsequently, what happened was that certain groups in Indo-European or Indo-Aryan society acquired farmland. Certain other groups could not do so. So the groups who could not do so became farm laborers. They became agricultural laborers, and eventually they become the Shudras. They come to be identified as the Shudras. So the Shudras were not originally engaged in peasant production, according to Romila Thapar. They were actually they were farm laborers. And the greater bulk of Indo-European or Indo-Aryan society comes to be identified as the Vaishyas, who were the original agriculturalists. So this is how status differentiation emerges in Indo-European or Indo-Aryan society, and it stratifies into the various Varnas. Now, what was the original status of the Shudras, and how they were in general treated in Indo-European or Indo-Aryan society? A lot on this matter has been written by another Marxist historian, R.S. Sharma, in one of his monographs. He has a dedicated monograph on the origin of the Shudras and their general status in ancient early Indian societies. It is called Shudras in Early India. By the way, R.S. Sharma thinks that Shudras were one of the earliest or an early Indo-European or Indo-Aryan tribe to migrate to India. And more tribes pour in later, and something happens, probably military conflicts happen between this early migrant group, Indo-European group, and the later migrants, and they come to be subjugated militarily by the later migrants, and hence their status diminishes in Indo-European, Indo-Aryan society, and they come to be identified as Shudras, and the lot of farm laborers, or generally the lot of menials, falls upon these people. Nevertheless, what was the general status, what was the general treatment of Shudras, of these people in early Indian societies, early Indian society amongst the Indo-Europeans, Indo-Aryans? R.S. Sharma says that Shudras could participate in rituals, for example, and there was no ritual stigma upon them. There was no stigma of impurity upon them in early India. However, their participation was such in some of the major rituals, for example, the Ashwamedha ritual, that their inferiority was underlined. They would not be able to partake in some essential parts of the rituals. I do not remember what exactly these parts identified by Arashama are. So this is what he generally contends regarding the status of Shudras in Indo-European or Indo-Aryan society, that they would participate in rituals, but their participation would be in a manner that it would underline their inferiority, general inferiority. Coming down to the later times, for example, more in India, R. Sharma writes that the lot of chattel slavery falls upon Shudras in this period. There were many state-owned farms in Mauryan India, in the Mauryan realm, which were actually managed by agents of the state, by a class of bureaucrats, by a category of bureaucrats called the Sita Dakshas. So R.S. Sharma writes, he contends that Shudra farm laborers would cultivate these farms, these state-owned farms, and they were basically treated more or less treated like chattel slaves in this period. So their status, interestingly, diminishes in the Mauryan period. Though a lot of social advocacy groups, certain political groups, political elements in this country today contended that since Buddhism was supposedly the dominant spiritual framework, dominant spiritual outlook in modern India, it established a kind of social utopia in which all social groups were treated equally, and there were no major status variations in this period. Um, from what on the basis of what R.S. Sharma writes, it does not seem to be the case. Now, moving farther on, the lot of the Shudras improves in the later centuries, and this improvement occurs, interestingly, as he writes, in the Gupta period majorly. When he says, and I think I'm quoting his phrase here, the phrase that he uses, the ritual enfranchisement of Shudras takes place. For the first time, they do not just participate in rituals, but even conduct in rituals. And this is in the context of the large-scale emergence of bhakti as a framework of devotion, the large-scale emergence of Bhagavatism as a framework of devotion. It simplifies a lot of the ritual practices. For example, in the Bhagavad Gita, you might remember Krishna says, offer me a leaf or a libation of water with devotion, and that is sufficient. So probably Bhagavatism takes this very idea forward, and rituals are significantly simplified as well as they're democratized. As a result of which Shudras are incorporated into the practice and conduct of rituals, and according to this gentleman, the ritual enfranchisement of Shudras takes place.
This is also the R.S. Sharma view.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
That's right.
This
He's a
sounds like,
Marxist, by the way.
is this
Yeah.
is this sort of equating with Calvinism or Martin Luther?
Well, he doesn't draw the equation, not
Okay.
consciously, but you may in your mind if you wish to. Anyway, so this is the story till the early centuries of the Common Era, not quite the early centuries of the Common Era, till at least the third or the fourth, or the fourth and the fifth centuries of the Common Era. Now, in the subsequent centuries, there is a proliferation of jatis. Till now, more or less, till the Gupta period, you have the Varna framework, I suppose, intact.
Okay.
There are identifiably four Varnas, the Brahmins, Kshatriyas, Vaishyas, and Shudras. But in contemporary India, we all know that this is no more the case. The Varna Vyavastha in its pristine form ceased to exist a long time ago, about 1,000 years ago. And the proliferation of jatis took place in early medieval India. So coming down to the 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th centuries, there is a tremendous proliferation of jatis. And more or less the jati vyavastha, jati system, as we see today, begins to emerge. How does this, or why does this take place? Once again, I shall take recourse to the views of R.S. Sharma. He has a postulation or a theory in this regard. He says that there is a tremendous social dislocation in this period.
Okay.
And probably the root of this dislocation goes back to the invasions of India by these foreign ethnic groups, the Shakas, Kushanas, Hunas, etc. They um, cause a lot of a social turmoil, probably due to which the original Varna system breaks down because there is a political instability. Nevertheless, what happens eventually is that there is a tremendous social dislocation, and as he writes in one of his essays, probably he guesses the Vaishyas and Shudras refuse or begin to refuse to discharge their traditional servile functions. They refuse to accept their servility and inferiority um, uh, uh, regarding the or in relation to the Brahmins and the Kshatriyas. At the same time, certain infractions in the traditional Varna order begin to take place. There is the large scale peasantization of Shudras. Shudras, as I told you, according to the Marxists, were originally farm laborers. They were not peasants themselves. But in this period, the peasantization of Shudras takes place in the sense that Shudras begin to take to peasant production. They begin to emerge as a cultivating social group for the first time. On the other hand, a lot of Vaishyas give up their traditional occupations, which were animal husbandry and farming, and they take to artisanal occupations. So the original Varna framework of a social organization begins to fracture further. And since many Shudras are peasantized, many Vaishyas take to artisanal occupations, these social groups become jati groups in their own right. So you have the rudimentary emergence of the jati system, jati vyavastha, as we see it today. It begins to fracture and multiply, more or less. Why does how does the peasantization of Shudras take place? Well, R.S. Sharma's theory is that since they were originally refusing to discharge their servile functions regarding in relation to the superior Varna groups, political authorities or the political class in general begins to allot land to Brahmins, especially in the remoter areas, remoter parts of the political realms. And as they donate land to the Brahmins, they also alienate police functions to the Brahmins, administrative functions to the Brahmins. So this is how the feudalization of Indian political system begins to happen. So you have Brahmins being allotted land, donated land in the remoter parts of the the political realms all across the country. These Brahmins also enjoy administrative and police functions,
Right.
and probably I'm extrapolating upon Sharma's views here. Probably as a result, what they begin to do is that they settle Shudras on the lands allotted to them. They exercise the administrative and police authority alienated to them, and they probably forcefully settle Shudras on the lands allotted to them. And this is how Shudras begin to emerge as a peasant caste. And they might have done that because, their land allotments, as I said, were in the remoter parts of the political realms, which were insufficiently Sanskritized in those days in the 8th, 9th, 10th centuries. And there was a scarcity of peasant labor in these areas because the peasant production had not properly emerged in these areas at that time. And again, that was because these territories, these realms, these regions, regions is a better term, these regions were inhabited by aboriginal tribes who were not peasant producers originally. Nevertheless, broadly, what I'm saying is that in this period, in the early medieval period, there is a proliferation of jatis due to certain reasons identified by the Marxists, which you may or may not agree with. And what is the basis of R.S. Sharma's postulation? It is extremely flimsy, by the way. He looks at the Puranic literature and he finds and he notices that most of the Puranic literature identify a Kali Yuga in which the Varna order breaks down, in
Right.
which the subordinated social groups refuse to discharge their subordinated servile functions in relation to the Brahmins and the Kshatriyas. And he guesses that probably this is what actually was taking place when the Puranic literature was composed, that the Varna order, as it had existed till then, had begun to collapse, had begun to fracture. Well, you may or may not agree with this postulation. I find it a little hard to accept because he doesn't cite a concrete empirical evidence in support of his hypothesis. He has to point out a certain region or multiple regions of the country of India where this might have taken place. So the point is that if you're making a postulation like this, it has to be supported by sociological evidence. He doesn't cite that evidence. So the postulation is extremely flimsy, in my view. Nevertheless, I've broadly outlined what, in his view, is the process of the proliferation of jatis.
Right.
Now, how is the jati hierarchy established? Now, he doesn't dwell on this matter. A sociologist whose name is Dipankar Gupta has. He has this monograph interrogating caste. And interestingly, he argues that since this was a period in which the feudalization of polities was taking place, multiple foci of a political authority were emerging underneath the king.
Right.
And these were the Samantas, these were the Nayakas, local chieftains or local warlords, strongmen basically, who dominated certain areas. So there were peasant castes and artisanal castes serving these local strongmen, serving the Rajas, serving the Nayakas and the Samantas. And Dipankar Gupta's hypothesis is that these jati groups who were in a servile relationship vis-a-vis in relation to these Nayakas and the Samantas, derived their status in social organization, in the social world, from the status of the Nayaka or the Samanta they served. So if this was a high-ranking Nayaka or Samanta being served by a number of peasant groups or by a number of artisanal groups, their social status too would be relatively high. But if this was a relatively low-ranking Nayaka or Samanta, their social status, the peasant groups or the artisanal groups serving him too would enjoy a relatively low social status. Now, moving on to another issue regarding the caste system, which is an erroneous term in my view, or a jati vyavastha, the one regarding power asymmetries and oppression.
Right.
Now, to what extent were the Shudras actually oppressed? To what extent were the Shudras actually deprived of social agency, social power? I don't think they were deprived of social agency or social power to any significant extent at all, or they suffered any major ritual stigma either. Already, I've told you, according to R.S. Sharma, they did not suffer ritual stigma in the early historical period. They participated in rituals coming down to the Gupta period. Again, he contends that there is a veritable or there is a major ritual enfranchisement of the Shudras. They begin to participate in rituals on a significant level on account of the emergence of bhakti as the dominant spiritual framework, as the dominant spiritual outlook. Now, even in the early medieval period or in the later centuries of later centuries in medieval India, I do not think that the Shudras were socially disenfranchised to any significant extent.
I see.
For example, Bertenstein is a historian who has studied the Chola and the Vijayanagara imperial polities. And according to him, in the Chola polities, at least, there is a significant evidence of Sanskrit learning among the Shudra peasant groups.
Oh.
Were Brahmins significantly differentiated from a peasant society, which was dominantly Shudra? Again, this was not the case, according to Bertenstein, in the Chola imperial polity at least.
Oh.
According to him, in the Chola realms, Brahmins were submerged in the peasant society. They were very much a part of peasant society, and they had been administered to the ritual requirements, ritual
Right.
needs of peasant society, which was, of course, predominantly Shudra. So, in a typical, peasant settlement in a village, agricultural village, there would be a temple, and there would be Brahmins administering to, presiding over the rituals in this temple. And this temple would cater to the spiritual requirements and religious needs of the peasant society surrounding it. So this is how this social organization functioned, and there's no evidence, according to the Bertenstein, of any significant ritual disenfranchisement of Shudras in this social organization. He doesn't say as much in so many words, but this is the point, I suppose, which is derivable from his observations.
Right.
Now, do you wish to raise a
Yeah.
question?
Now, what are the how much do you agree with these theories, and what are the oppositions to these theories, and who are the other people to look up to of similar stature?
Yeah,
Who are
I'll come
the
to that. I'll come to that. I'll come to
let's
that
go
in
to
a bit.
that directly, like Nicholas
Let me
P.
come down
Dirks,
to
etc.
yeah. Let me come down to the colonial period.
Hmm.
Let me travel a few more centuries, and
Yeah,
then
yeah,
I shall wind up this
yeah,
monologue, and
yeah, yeah.
we may take up these questions
Right.
thereafter.
Yeah.
So, coming down to the 15th, 16th centuries, coming down to the 16th century, at least, there is a considerable evidence of a Shudras building political power. As it is, even in the previous centuries, there have been many Shudra dynasties. For example, the Nandas were Shudras, Mauryas were Shudras too. And this is deducible from the fact that the social origins are somewhat hazy.
Hmm.
There isn't much known about the social origins of
Hmm.
these dynasties. What is said in the Puranic origin about it is that their founders were quote unquote of low birth. So
Hmm.
there is a considerable evidence even in the earliest centuries about Shudras building political power or ascending to wield political power in a social
Hmm.
world, in a social milieu.
Hmm.
Now, coming down to the 16th century, you have, in fact, full-blown Shudra kingship in the Vijayanagara realm, interestingly. There is a
Hmm.
monograph, a relatively recent monograph, co-authored by three historians. The names are Sanjay Subramaniam, Vellacheru Rao, and Shalman, Robert Shalman, I think is the full name. They study Nayaka kingship as it emerged in certain urban centers in Tamil Nadu. In three urban centers, specifically, their names are Tanjavur, Madurai, and they mention another name, Senji. Now, these urban centers formally fell inside the Vijayanagara realm.
Hmm.
But these were dominated by local chieftains who styled themselves as Nayakas, and they paid tribute to the imperial city, that is Vijayanagara,
Hmm.
and the monarch and the ruler sitting there. So they were nominally under the suzerainship of the Vijayanagara ruler. Now, these chieftains, these Nayakas, were all Shudras, and they actually reveled in that status. They flaunted their Shudra status. They called themselves resplendent, glorious Shudras. These are
Hmm.
precisely the words used by these historians, and they use these words based on their translations of certain contemporary texts, which describe their kingship. So
Hmm.
these Nayaka chiefs, who were all Shudras, called themselves resplendent, glorious Shudras, and based on what? Based on, interestingly, the Purusha Sukta hymn in the Rig Veda, which
Hmm.
uh, says that the Shudras emerged from the feet of the cosmic Purusha.
Hmm.
So they took this bit of the hymn and inflected its uh, its statement to their advantage. They
Hmm.
said that, look, the Shudras emerged from the feet of the cosmic Purusha, and their feet
Hmm.
are especially holy, and they
Right.
indeed are holy in Indic
Exactly.
imagination. So
Yeah.
this is why we are so glorious.
Hmm.
And it's a tremendous thing.
Hmm.
They would say that we are Shudras.
Hmm.
And they would flaunt the wealth at their disposal. And according to these historians, they developed a distinctive framework of kingship in which the ruler was a bhogi par excellence, that
Hmm.
the ruler would engage in an excess of sense enjoyment, sensory enjoyment, and by and large take to or constitute his authority, constitute his kingship through dramatic excess. These are
Hmm.
incidentals. We did not dwell much on them. We did not be detained by these incidentals.
Hmm.
Nevertheless, so the point is that in 16th century, nominally inside the Vijayanagara realm, you have a full-blown instance of Shudra kingship, and it's a very magnificent instance. This is a
Hmm.
case when this is an instance when Shudra kings actually flaunt their social status. Uh,
Hmm.
that is their
Yeah.
status as Shudras, and they revel in it.
Yeah.
Now, coming down to the later centuries, let us come down to the colonial
Hmm.
period. What happens to this social institution, to Jati Vyavastha then? In my opinion, it ossifies it to an extent. Earlier, it was very fluid, and social groups moved up and down this institution pretty commonly.
Yeah.
Uh, of course, this movement up and down would take generations, sometimes centuries too. It was like the movement of glaciers or
Hmm.
a bit comparable to continental drift. But this fluidity in the institution is arrested in the colonial period.
Hmm.
Um, and that is probably because according to this sociologist, well, according to this historian, Susan Bailey, who uses a lot of sociological evidence and sociological examination studies, etc., um, the colonial administrators freeze jati status to an
Yeah.
extent. And they do so by amplifying the jati identities.
Hmm.
Now, the chief source of revenue for the East India Company's administration was, of course, agriculture, as it was uh, for the Indian polities in the previous centuries. The East India Company too, when it became a state in the Indian context, it was primarily a land-based polity,
Hmm.
but it was a lot more systematic, methodical about um, its intrusions into agrarian management, into the agrarian setup of the country. So the East India Company tried to identify the most productive, remunerative jati groups engaged in peasant production. It identified the Reddis, the Kammas, the Jats, etc. In this regard. And Susan Bailey argues, or so to speak, hints that in the process it amplified these identities, the identities of these peasant groups, and ossified these identities.
Hmm.
This argument is not very clear to me, probably it's not very clear to you or to the audience as well, as to how this, freezing, this ossification of caste identities might have happened because these social groups are identified as the most productive or remunerative in terms of their peasant production. But nevertheless, and this is what she says.
Hmm.
So an element of ossification is introduced into Jati Vyavastha by the colonial administration, and it is more so in the later decades after it undertakes a census every 10 years. Now, one part or one aspect of this exercise was about identifying Jati status.
Hmm.
It would actually uh, try to identify the census operation would actually try to identify as to what the precise status in overall social organization was of a jati group.
Hmm.
Now, the result of this attempt, this endeavor, was that there were numerous status claims on the part of the various jati groups who
Yeah.
gave data, provided this census data
Hmm.
to the colonial administrators. Uh, So you have this matrix, this medal of conflicting status claims
Yeah.
under
Yeah.
the colonial administration
Yeah.
on the one hand, and on
Hmm.
the other hand, you have the colonial administration actually cherry picking on these claims and
Hmm.
bestowing it below their status, a high
Yeah.
or low status upon the Jati groups.
Hmm.
So the Jati organization, I suppose, becomes a hierarchy in the proper sense for the first time in the process. Earlier, it wasn't quite a hierarchy. There were
Hmm.
competing claims and counterclaims earlier
Hmm.
too, but these claims were not projected upon the state.
Hmm.
Generally, mostly, the
Right.
state would not determine the status of a Jati.
Hmm.
There were occasions when it did, as
Hmm.
I've found
Okay.
through my researches and my readings, but generally it wasn't the case.
Hmm.
A Jati group would make a status claim, and if it or whether it managed to enforce this status claim upon its social world or not, it depended, as I said in the previous podcast,
Hmm.
upon its level extent of land ownership.
Oh yeah.
Now the situation is completely different in the later part of the 19th century. Now you actually have the state bestowing status upon the Jati groups through the census.
Yeah.
And since the agent in this case is the state,
Hmm.
this is a legally formal status, so to speak, more or less.
Yeah.
There's a legal formality attached to the status, and hence it is um, very apparent, very obvious in the social world, and it is
Hmm.
also to an extent immutable, at least
Right.
for the time being.
Right.
Anyway, so on the one hand, you have the Jati Vyavastha becoming a hierarchy for the first time, and on the other hand, again, simultaneous to this process is its, so to speak, Brahmanization.
Hmm.
How does this happen? This happens as the colonial administrators engage Brahmins as their interlocutors,
Hmm.
and this is a process which the anthropologist Nicholas Dirks terms the emergence of the ethnographic state. According to him, post 1857, the colonial state becomes an ethnographic state because it is very anxiety ridden. It has just suppressed the Great Uprising of 1857, and now it is keen on identifying which social groups in the Indian context are potentially rebellious, which social groups are potentially rebellious, and it engages a Brahmanical interlocutors to understand Indian society better, to gather ethnographic data regarding Indian society.
Right.
And since it engages Brahmanical interlocutors, these people, these individuals, these Brahmins give the impression before the colonial administrators as though the jati system is determined by Brahmins, has been determined by Brahmins always, and it is inherently, essentially, a Brahmanically organized institution. So this is how
Right.
the Brahmanization of caste takes place.
Hmm.
I suppose that is more or less that at my end. And again, there
Okay.
is another phenomenon emergent in the 19th century, which is the amplification of a Brahmanical power.
Hmm.
Now, for the first time, you have the administration in the context of colonialism, in the context of colonial India, being dominated by Brahmins. Earlier, again, it wasn't quite that.
Hmm.
Agrarian administration was generally not Brahmin dominated in the previous centuries, and that is due to the reason that, as I read in an article in the Economic and Political Weekly, it required one being, so to speak, in contemporary language, networked amongst the agricultural jatis, amongst the jatis engaged in peasant production, which Brahmins typically were not.
Hmm.
And hence they were not appointed as agricultural administrators by the previous polities, the polities which existed in India prior to the emergence of the company state, the East India Company state.
Hmm.
But now, um, whether one was appointed as an administrator or not, it depended primarily upon literacy and numeracy, which Brahmins possessed generally. Not
Hmm.
always, but they generally possessed, and hence they come to be appointed in agricultural administration, agrarian administration in large numbers by the colonial state, which amplifies the Brahmanical power, which makes it more visible. In fact, my position would be that the Brahmins in the previous centuries, prior to the emergence of colonialism in India, actually did not wield a substantive power. They
Hmm.
projected a ritual status, they projected cultural power, and to an
Hmm.
extent, this ritual status and cultural power was acknowledged
Hmm.
in the social world, but in substantive temporal authority, they did not wield. Here and there, you have Brahmins as the king's advisors,
Hmm.
definitely, but they did not participate in the essential economic functions to the extent that it would bestow status upon them, substantive status and power and authority upon them. But now, under the colonial administration, the situation changed.
Hmm.
Anyway, so I end my monologue here, and
Hmm.
now we may move on to your questions and to the audience's questions.
Yeah. In this context, whether the Brahmins were in fact that significant and powerful or not, I'm reminded of two papers I read, one by Hitesh Ranjan Sannal and one by a researcher called Declan Quigley. Have you heard of him?
No, I haven't.
Okay.
Are
He's
they
now
sociologists or are they historians? I'm not familiar much with
anthropologist.
the sociologists. Anthropologists, I'm not familiar much with
Right.
that line
Yeah,
of academic
both of
work.
them are not historians. So he was in University of St Andrews in Edinburgh. Declan Quigley argues that Brahmins were simply the people who were going to absorb the pollution of the state and therefore, in fact, almost treated as untouchables in some contexts and were not that significant, not that powerful. And Hitesh Ranjan Shandal points out that Brahmins were simply the employees of the entire society in general, because they were simply handing out genealogies and caste credentials and hierarchy credentials to randomly whoever paid them.
Yeah, that's right. I would agree with these positions, in
Hmm.
fact, more or less fully.
Hmm.
Mostly, my observation is that the Brahmins functioned as another service caste or a
Exactly.
jati group providing some ritual religious services
Exactly.
to the more dominant castes.
Exactly.
And that is still the case in parts of North India. If you travel in
Hmm.
Haryana, if
Right.
you travel in the interior of Rajasthan, for example,
Hmm.
Brahmins do not enjoy any substantive social status in these
Hmm.
parts of the country. That is
Yeah.
my observation. They're just
Yeah.
another service caste,
Exactly.
inclined to the more dominant castes
Right.
in these areas,
Yeah.
which are respectively the Jats and the Rajputs. So
Yeah.
they do not enjoy much substantive status. And again, ritual stigma
Hmm.
could fall upon the Brahmins too. There is a very
Yeah.
interesting anthropological study by this person, by this academic whose name is Andre Bethe.
Okay.
It goes back to the 1960s, I suppose,
Okay.
early or mid 1960s. That is when it was originally done. And the title of the study is Caste, Class, and Power.
Okay.
So Andre Bete goes and spends time in some village in Tamil Nadu, which I guess is in the Tanjavur district. I told you in the previous podcast that anthropologists do not reveal the exact identity, precise identity of their subjects, even if the subject is a place.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
the
Hmm.
exact identity of the subject, which is a village in Tamil Nadu, is not revealed to us. But I guess this is somewhere in the Tanjavur district because in this village, Brahmins are the chief landowners, and that is the case in the Tanjavur district. So this is
Okay.
an agraharam where he goes and stays, um, inhabited by Brahmin landowners.
Hmm.
And their lands are cultivated by a caste group who are probably the Vellalas. I'm guessing
Okay.
here because he doesn't identify this caste group.
Hmm.
And the farm laborers upon their lands are probably the colors. I'm guessing again here because
Okay.
he doesn't reveal the identities of these caste groups.
Hmm.
He just identifies their functions and their status in the agricultural production. Anyway, so the substantive authority in this case in the agricultural economy of the village is wielded by these people who are the tenants of the Brahmins, and not by the Brahmins themselves.
Hmm.
And if the farm laborers are oppressed, it is very likely uh, done by again these people who are the tenants of the Brahmins.
Hmm.
And I told you that the ritual stigma could befall the Brahmins too,
Yeah.
and you see this in this instance,
Hmm.
where the Brahmins, interestingly, go to the villages
Hmm.
if they pass through. Uh, if they pass through the villages of these farm laborers who are Adi Dravidas, yes, now I remember. Yes,
Oh.
this caste group is identified, this social group is identified by Andre Vete, precisely by its name. So the farm laborers are the Adidravids and the Brahmins, if they happen to pass through the villages inhabited by them, through their villages, the Adidravids would actually undergo a ritual purification. They would
With
wash their
Gomutra, in
huts.
fact.
Yeah, that's right. So they would actually more or less treat these Brahmins as
Yeah.
untouchables. If a Brahmin happened to pass through an Adidravid village, which was rarely, of course,
Yeah.
because the Brahmins would, of their own accord, avoid
Yeah.
them.
Hmm.
Nevertheless, if that happened at all, the Adi-Dravidas would wash their huts, take a purificatory bath,
Yeah.
and break their earthen pots and pans.
Yeah.
So, on the one hand, these Brahmins did not wield any substantial authority in the agricultural economy, though they were nominally landowners. Their lands were actually controlled by their tenants. And
Right.
again, they also suffered ritual stigma from the
Hmm.
point of view of people who were supposedly at the bottom of the jati vyavastha in this
Yeah.
social context. So
Yeah.
I completely agree with the positions of
Hmm.
these anthropologists.
Right. Sir, one view is that caste is distinctly an Indian thing. Some say caste is just as the same as class and therefore it can be observed everywhere. And some say caste is specifically status group and therefore also available and it can be visible everywhere. What is it
Very
according
yes,
to you?
yes. So you have so many multiple readings of this institution, the caste system or the jati vyavastha,
Yeah.
and these multiple readings actually reveal, in my eyes, as to how malleable, how fluid the institution was and
Yeah.
still is.
Hmm.
Sometimes the jati groups also overlapped with what we may term classes. Generally,
Hmm.
jati groups were also functioning groups. Sorry, jati groups were functional groups.
Hmm.
For example, potters were a functional group, barbers were a functional group, that is, they discharged an economic function. They were a class of, they were a group of professionals in
Hmm.
contemporary modern language, these
Hmm.
jati groups,
Hmm.
potters, barbers, and so on.
Hmm.
And being so, in that capacity, they were also in classes in a certain way because they occupied a certain location in the contemporary system of economic production.
Right.
And sometimes on account of this, why sometimes? Generally on account of this, these social groups, these jati groups were also status groups because being located or on account of being located at a certain point in the relations of production,
Right.
they would also enjoy or not enjoy an economic status,
Exactly.
which meant that these were economic status groups as well.
Hmm. Yeah,
So
that
it was
was
a
it.
very fluid, and it still
Hmm.
continues to be a very fluid institution,
Right.
though it lost some of its fluidity in the colonial period, probably.
Yeah. That in fact was my second question. Next question, actually, I've written it down, so please bear with me. And
You had raised a question when I was delivering the monologue. Maybe we
Yeah.
may go back to it for a bit and then take fresh questions.
Oh yeah,
Take up fresh
that question
questions.
you've actually answered already. That whether
Okay.
you what you think of Nicholas B. Dirks and people like them, their arguments.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So here I was going to ask that, aren't castes simply status groups because social power or status is not derived from economic standing, and that so-called naked money power leads to relinquishing that social honor. On the other hand, social honor or prestige may be the basis of economic power. So therefore, caste is simply status group.
Well, jati groups or caste groups have always made a status claim.
Hmm.
And as I said a while ago, and again in the previous podcast, whether they were able to enforce the status claim in their social world or not, it chiefly depended upon their land ownership.
Hmm.
So here is the situation. Here is the reading of the situation historically, from my point of view. As I said a few moments ago, these jati groups were also functional groups. They
Hmm.
discharged an economic function or a social function. On account of that, they enjoyed a certain position in the relations of production, and as a result of that, they would or would not enjoy a certain economic status. They would
Hmm.
enjoy a high economic status, perhaps, if or a relatively high economic status, probably, if their social function, economic function was valued, and if it was based on a relatively high value skill. But if it wasn't so, their status would be relatively low.
Hmm.
And again, besides the fact that these functional groups were located at certain points in the production relations, and due to that, they would objectively enjoy or not enjoy a certain status, they would also make a subjective status claim, regardless of their position. This is a slightly complex
Yeah.
situation. As I read it, I hope you are able to understand
Yeah.
what
Yeah.
I'm trying to say. You're
Yeah. Yeah.
able to get what I'm trying to say, and the audience is as well.
Yeah.
So there was an objective status
Hmm.
which came with a jati group's location in the relations of production. And alongside this, they also made a subjective status claim, which would be generally typically based on an origin myth,
Hmm.
regardless of the social function they discharged. For
Exactly.
example, the leather workers
Hmm.
in colonial India at the end of the 19th century, at the turn of the 20th century, in what is today Uttar Pradesh, began to claim that they were originally Kshatriyas.
Hmm.
And they took to working later and they gave up their original vocation, which was warfare, due to, if I remember correctly, as they said, the massacres of Kshatriyas carried out by Parashuram.
Hmm.
Since Parashuram roamed the earth, roamed the length and breadth of India with his battle axe killing Kshatriyas, their
Hmm.
ancestors hid themselves
Hmm.
and gave up their original vocation, which was warfare, and by they became leather workers, leather tanners.
Hmm.
So
Dipankar Gupta also shows something similar in his research in Rajasthan.
yeah, that's right. Yeah. So that's right. You have so in this case you have a subjective claim to status,
Right.
regardless of the social group's objective location in the production relations and the status that came with it.
Hmm.
Leather workers were actually not very poor generally,
Okay.
as far as I perceive.
Okay.
In North India, at least, they
Hmm.
were a relatively better off jati group as far
Hmm.
as economic wherewithal, as far as their wherewithal is concerned.
Hmm.
But again, since there was ritual stigma associated with working later,
Yeah.
their objective social status
Hmm.
was low, or
Right.
the social status that was bestowed upon them in the social world was low. Now,
Right.
regardless of this, they made a subjective claim
Yeah.
to a certain status, to another jati identity based on an origin myth.
Hmm.
So it's a complex situation.
Yeah.
Caste is an interaction of so many subjectivities, so many objective realities,
Hmm.
uh, which is what makes it so fluid.
Hmm. And sir, in terms of the objective reality of the status of Brahmins, would it be fair to say that they were simply the nobility, as in the European sense, whose position would be the same as the, let's say, the personal staff of a patrimonial ruler or lord, whose employment is not up to that ruler, because that position, that the hiring of the Brahmin, is ordained by tradition and religion, not just
Yeah.
his function.
Well, they were not, what did you say, a lordly class, an aristocracy.
No, yeah, yeah, nobility, who would be, let's say, the
No, no, they
supporting
were not.
staff of the ruler.
No, they were not nobility
Okay,
in the proper sense, as
hmm,
I would understand the term
okay,
nobility. And now you have the sword nobility, the
hmm,
warrior nobility originally in every society.
hmm,
Every society has had this nobility.
hmm,
And there was also a sort of, in many pre-modern societies, a bureaucratic nobility, a bureaucratic aristocracy,
yeah,
which became very dominant in France in the 18th century,
yeah, that is what I mean
by the
here.
way. Yes. So they weren't quite a bureaucratic aristocracy either.
Okay,
Once in a while, definitely you have these Brahmin advisors to the king.
yeah,
Uh,
Amatyas.
much is, yeah, definitely the Amatyas,
Hmm,
and much is made of them. For
hmm, hmm.
example, much is made of the Brahmin advisor to Chandragupta,
Yeah, Chanakya.
Chanakya.
Hmm.
But these Brahmins are still exceptional. How many Brahmins enjoyed such royal patronage at the court at any point of time?
Of course.
Um, under any ruler, how many Brahmin Amatyas there might be at the court? Maybe half a dozen, maybe a dozen, 2 dozen.
Hmm,
Even if you make a very generous estimate, uh, so for every Brahmin who enjoyed patronage at the court,
hmm.
well, there were thousands, so there were hundreds of thousands who did not.
True.
So Brahmins were not even a bureaucratic aristocracy in that sense. Brahmins ideally
Hmm.
were meant to be a cognitive elite, um,
Yeah.
enjoying overall social patronage,
Hmm.
enjoying, so to speak, a stipend
Hmm.
bestowed upon them by society at large.
Yeah.
The idea was that the Brahmin would undertake a scholarship, would devote themselves to scholarship, and in lieu of that, the society at large would sustain them.
Yeah.
So Brahmanical power, to the extent that it was a power at all,
Hmm.
was primarily spiritual and cultural. In an
Yeah.
ideal situation, it
Yeah.
was meant to be so. It wasn't even bureaucratic power. It wasn't power that derived from a close association with the royal authority.
Hmm.
It was a very nebulous, diffuse power, so to
Hmm.
speak. If Brahmins come to enjoy substantive temporal power at all, in my
Hmm.
opinion, it is in colonial India,
Hmm.
because under the East India Company's administration,
Hmm.
they come to be incorporated in the agrarian administration
Hmm.
in very large numbers. For
Hmm.
example, in the South India,
Hmm.
um, Telugu Deshastha Brahmins come to enjoy bureaucratic positions in agrarian administration in very large numbers, and they become dominant across what is today in Tamil Nadu, and of course, the um, Telugu states.
Hmm.
Sorry, not in both the Telugu states, in coastal Andhra and what is today Andhra Pradesh, and
Okay.
to some extent in southern Kerala too, which was a
Right.
part of Madras presidency in those days.
Hmm.
So, as I said about a half an hour ago or more, Brahmanical power is amplified in this
Yeah.
way.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the amplification of a Brahmanical power is the reason why you have so many social advocacies, militant social advocacies, and militant opposition to this supposed Brahmanical power emerging in colonial India.
Hmm.
This power is not always the case through the course of Indian history. It's
Hmm.
actually an exception in the case of a colonial India. This is
Yeah.
my understanding.
Yeah. Uh, Sir, what about the argument that since it's not exactly just one centralized king always running the entire society, if there are little kings in every context, and they have
Yeah.
their Brahmins as well. So therefore, the Brahmin is the nobility no matter what the situation.
Even if you account for these so-called little kings, the
Hmm.
local potentates, the
Yeah.
Nayakas in South India, for
Yeah.
example, not a lot of Brahmins would enjoy a courtly patronage.
Hmm.
In the Vijayanagara realm, for example, I mentioned a while ago, you have these Nayaka courts. in Madurai, Tanjavur, and a place called Sanji or Sanjay. I don't know where that exactly is in Tamil Nadu. It is still three courts.
Hmm.
Even if you make a very generous estimate of the patronage they might have bestowed upon Brahmins as officials, as administrators, it wouldn't be a very large number.
Hmm.
Yes, the three courts made large-scale annadanams
Hmm.
to Brahmins on a daily basis.
Hmm.
But that is just feeding a lot of people. And by feeding
Yeah.
someone, you do not necessarily bestow, any substantive status upon that person. You
Hmm.
actually flaunt your own status.
Hmm.
As these historians, the three that I mentioned, Belachari Rao, Shalman, and Sanjay Subramaniam say, Nayaka courts engaged in a lot of dramatic access
Hmm.
to constitute their power because they were actually subordinated to the great ruler in imperial Vijayanagara in the imperial city,
Hmm.
and their genuine substantive authority was limited in that way.
Hmm.
So their courts depended on a lot of dramatic access to underline project their authority. And one aspect of it is a dramatic access was feeding a lot of Brahmins on
Hmm.
a daily basis. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they bestowed patronage upon Brahmins by incorporating them in the administration. I don't think that might have happened on a very large scale.
Hmm.
I do not suppose so.
Okay. Now, sir, last question before we take some audience questions, as
Yeah, we
much
have to
time as you have.
wind up by
Yeah.
9 as usual. It's
Yeah.
8:53 already as per my phone.
Yeah. Yeah. The last most important question is that how distinctly evil Hindu phenomenon, evil Indian phenomenon is the caste system, or how universal is it?
Well, I suppose um, status variations in society are a universal phenomenon, and these status variations existed all over the world.
Hmm.
Even certain social groups suffering ritual stigma due to certain functions they discharged is also a very universal phenomenon. In
Right.
Europe, for example, grave diggers, undertakers were
Yeah.
stigmatized once upon a
Hmm.
time, but they were socially very marginal.
Hmm.
And actually, in fact, you do not have much evidence of a lot of social mobility either in medieval Europe,
Yeah.
because the economy of medieval Europe wasn't that, what do I say, multifarious. It
Hmm.
was a very rudimentary economy in Europe
Yeah.
um, till the 15th and 16th centuries when the continent begins to emerge from the feudal relations of production.
Hmm.
And if economic production is relatively rudimentary and not so multifarious, there is little room for social mobility
Hmm.
in its framework. But in India, it was very different.
Hmm.
In India, there was a thriving peasant production and a thriving artisanal production,
Hmm.
extremely multifarious. And so there was a lot of room for social mobility in the framework of economic production in India, which
Okay.
wasn't there in Europe. So
Yeah.
on the one hand, you have certain social groups being stigmatized there, and on the other hand, there was little room for social mobility.
Hmm.
So I don't think that Jati Vyavastha is such a specifically evil Indian phenomenon.
Hmm.
If you understand it in terms of social status groups, social status groups
Right.
have existed, or multiple status groups have existed in any social context, in
Right.
any social world. It's a very universal phenomenon.
Hmm. And whatever of its evil character remains today, would you say that the best way to solve that or to treat that is just free market, because that brings impersonal rational decisions and not traditional decisions?
Well, yes. I said some minutes ago that to some extent Jati Vyavastha ossifies in the colonial period
Right.
because the state bestows status upon the Jati groups in this case.
Yeah.
But this ossification, if it happened,
Hmm.
if you assume that it happened, began to break down in post-colonial India. I
Right.
suppose 80s and 90s onwards very rapidly due to the expansion of the Indian economy, due to large-scale urbanization. And in an urban context today, unless you're going for an arranged marriage,
Hmm.
um, caste is a redundant, jati is a redundant institution.
Right. And how much of that should we credit to Periyar Ambedkar versus to the free market or capitalism, whatever we have of it?
It's happened as a natural as a natural corollary to the expansion of the Indian economy and
Hmm.
urbanization. It's
Hmm.
not necessarily due to the political or social advocacy.
Hmm. And what do you think of Periyar? Hasn't he said some insane, vile, genocidal things against Brahmins? And why should there be a hostel named after him in JNU and a
He's an
national forest named
interesting,
after him?
that I would say is that he's an interesting psychological case study.
Hmm.
And he did say a lot of things which are rather unsavory
Yeah.
about a certain social groups and his interpretation of or reinterpretation of or repurposing of Indian narrative traditions. The Itihasa tradition, for example,
Hmm.
is um, rather unacceptable to me. Uh,
Hmm.
there is a little scholarship there, and
Right.
mm, it is entirely more or less about rather um, what do I say, unsavory rhetoric. We'll have to
Right.
wind up now, Nirajan, very soon.
Okay.
It's
Uh,
about to be 9.
uh, yeah. Um Wait. Where did the question go? Wait. Someone is asking. Uh, what's the etymology of Mukho, Chotto, Bondo, Gongo, Bhatta? Those surnames, Brahmin surnames.
I do not know a lot on this. Um, Tradition has it that these jati groups or these groups of Brahmins were brought to Bengal by the Sena dynasty.
Hmm.
So um, the etymology of this name and, for example, Gangopadhyay is Upadhyay is
Hmm.
from Ganga,
Right.
I suppose.
Hmm.
Mukhopadhyay is Mukhya Upadhyay.
Hmm.
As to what Upadhyay originally denoted in this case, I do not know. Probably
Hmm.
scholarship.
Hmm.
So Upadhyayas from Ganga, Mukhya Upadhyayas, and so on.
Right.
This is that I know about the etymology
Okay.
of these caste names.
Okay. Okay. So last question for you, Madam Alopal is here. She is asking, could the whole aspect of the hereditary aspect of caste be elaborated upon empirically? How do we know it wasn't birth based? And again, when did it become birth based?
Yes, definitely. The primary jati identity would be birth based, but at the same time, the social function which came with at birth was not cut in stone. I give you a radical example. Take the case of the Kayastha caste group. Traditionally, this caste group has discharged the administrative functions. Castes have been accountants or advisors to the king and so on. But the castes have also been warlords.
Hmm.
After the extinction of the Hussein Shahi dynasty, which was around the late 15th century, I suppose, so 1494 or so,
Hmm.
uh, Bengal was practically stateless for 2 or 3 generations.
Hmm.
The Mughals sent their armies into Bengal, I think 1538 onwards, began to send their armies into Bengal. So for about 2 generations, Bengal was dominated by 12 chieftains or warlords. These are remembered as Baro Bhunyas. Pratapaditya was one of the Baro Bhunyas, by the way.
Hmm.
And all these chieftains or warlords were Kayasts.
Hmm.
Again, we hear a lot about the Ahoms defeating the Mughals
Yeah.
multiple times, and especially on one occasion, they inflicted a major defeat upon them
Yeah.
at the Battle of Saraighat.
Hmm.
Now, it is generally not known is that the captains and the generals of the Ahom army were typically Kayasts. You have these surnames, for example, Bora, Hazarika among Assamese Kayasts.
Hmm.
Originally, these surnames denoted status in the military hierarchy. So
Okay.
Hazarika was originally a commander of 1,000, a large military
Oh,
detachment. And the
Hajar.
smallest military detachment in the Ahom army was a group of posse of 12 soldiers. So
Okay.
Bora was the captain of
Oh.
a group of 12 soldiers. So the point that I'm trying to make is that yes, an original social function or economic function hypothetically came with your birth in a birth
Hmm.
community, in a jati group. Mostly, probably, people went on and discharged this social function, this economic function. But once again, this social function, economic function was not cut in stone.
Hmm.
In certain radical circumstances, and this function could be modulated upon, could be radically altered, or this individual from a certain caste group, jati group, could take to another social function altogether.
Right.
Actually, no, broadly, my argument, my understanding of a jati vyavastha is that it has to be understood two ways in the pre-colonial context. As pre-modern, pre-colonial political economy, so a matrix in which, social mores, economic functions intersected and molded, remolded each other, and also as a kind of a pre-modern, pre-colonial um, civil society in which multiple status claims
Right.
interacted.
Okay. Thank you, sir. You need to go now.
So that's it
Thank you, sir. We'll have to.
at my end today.
We'll need you back soon.
Thank you very much
I think we
for
need
having
part two,
me.
part three for of this topic.
Sure, sure,
Thank you, sir.
definitely look forward to.
Thank you,
So
sir.
thank you very much for having me again, and it was great conversing with you,
Thank
Nirajan.
you, sir.
Thank you very much. You're doing a
Thank you,
great
sir.
job. Good night.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Good night.
Bye. Bye.
Bye bye. Like Hazra in Bengal. Yeah, perhaps psychological case study. uh, I could pop in after Professor Dey for some comments. Yeah, come up. Is he still online? Where is mysterious sociologist? Let's call him up. হ্যালো, হ্যাঁ চলে আসো তাহলে রিক্যাপ করতে। হ্যাঁ হ্যাঁ চলে আসো রিক্যাপ করতে, তোমার লিঙ্ক পাঠাচ্ছি। আরে লিঙ্কই নেই ভেজা। I'm calling him but I didn't send him the link, lol. Some things are sometimes so slow. Rohan is saying এখনই বিজেপি ম্যানিফেস্টো কর। No, no, we'll do that in a separate stream with proper thumbnail and uh, names and stuff with the proper title. We'll do it on Monday, I think. Wait, let's wait for mysterious sociologist to join. Hello, Professor Lies a lot.
Hi.
Hi.
So I really enjoyed Dr. Dey's talk today.
Yeah, and people are going on saying BJP manifesto. ऐसा क्या है BJP manifesto में? We'll do it on Monday, right?
हाँ, कल करते हैं.
Yeah. Oh, tomorrow is Monday. Okay. Yeah. So let's do a recap. What did you think of it?
I wanted to add a few things. So Professor Dey wonderfully gave us a great, survey of historical literature. I'll be brief. I won't extend this beyond, let's say, half an hour or so. So I'll put in some more of the latest Indological and other research that I am familiar with.
Yeah, he gave his perspective from the history department. You are giving it from the sociology department.
From more sociology and kind of Indology as well, because I'm familiar with some of that literature. So what I can claim is that ये जो Brahman को land grant, that aspect is very relevant. When, like, I know he said bureaucratic nobility nahi tha in the sense of the way it is in Europe, because that's true, that Brahmins did not enjoy the kind of power that, let's say, the nobles of France enjoyed, right? Not in exactly that manner.
Yeah.
But here's the funny thing. Have you guys seen a movie called The Gentleman by Guy Ritchie? and
I'm watching the spin-off Netflix
you're
series now.
watching the series, right? So
Yeah.
there's a 15,000-acre estate, and
Yeah.
there's this family that owns a ton of land, and now they're, they need income
Yeah.
and all that stuff, and so they do illegal stuff.
Hmm.
But funny thing is that guy is a part of the gentry. That guy is a part of the old gentry of England.
Right.
Now, gentry of England was also not similar to the peerage. Peerage was the higher, so nobilitas major and nobilitas minor. These were the two categories in medieval and early modern England. Okay, so the gentry was never as powerful as the nobilitas major, who formed the majority of the House of Lords, dukes, and all that stuff, right? But they formed the nobilitas minor, but they were landowners, and they were not under the purview of the state. Okay.
Yeah.
So what happens is that if you're not like, the state formation leads to, I think M Shastri wants to join anyway. So if so the state becomes a very important aspect regarding status or caste. मतलब क्या है कि if the state pulls you and centralizes your status and बोलता है कि हाँ, today I knight Nirajan, Sir Nirajan, okay, and I give you a big land and position and ये वगैरह वगैरह. Now what happens is, if I go out of power, if you kill the king, then your power goes as well.
Yeah.
So the British monarchy did not really recognize the gentry that well. मतलब उनके साथ friendship था वगैरह सब था. That's the thing. Like, they never recognized them officially as a nobility, but that helped them. So now although the crown survives and sab theek hai, but the estate owners, like the gentlemen, their status does not depend on whether the crown takes care of them or not anymore. They are independent landowners.
Yeah.
So extrapolate that logic into what's happening with Brahmins with their land grants. Like, ये लोग एक village या large area में जाते हैं, they are the landowners now. They collect taxes. They are not directly under the state. So these were tax-free land grants. That's what makes them even awesome. So they could collect the taxes and keep it with themselves. I'm not saying they were all oppressive and assholes and all, but they could rank society according to their will in that region.
Okay.
So a large part of the society could be ranked by these people, and this is pretty common in Europe and other places. So if you're a lord and of a big estate, and you could essentially, so I'm not saying all Brahmins were landowners, that would be stupid, but a large number of the land grants that were given in the early medieval period and all, these did belong to Brahmins, many of them. Now, what is interesting is the Brahmins were a service caste, the old Vedic Brahmins, if we can call it that, and Vedic period mein Brahmins were not hereditary and all that. Ye Varna system was closer to that idea that people who were erudite and specialists, they could become Brahmins and all. But kya hota hai, during the Puranic period, basically the Gupta period, they become more hereditary in nature. Or ye bhi, the castes they rank, interestingly, were found in Buddhist sources. So Johannes Bronkhorst says that Brahmins were in the western part, like Pakistan, Afghanistan, that part, whereas Buddhists were dominant in the eastern part. Or kya tha ki Ashoka and all the other like Mauryan empires, they used to give huge land grants to these Buddhist monasteries. Okay. Now, what happens is that Buddhist monasteries used to get land grants, and Buddhism ko zor se, he imposed on Brahmins. Now, Brahmins were doing animal sacrifices for their livelihood also. Now, that means Ashoka is technically against them. Ashoka vegan tha, crazy vegan. Okay. So basically he goes against the Brahmins, and the Brahmins think that acha abhi to mere ko wo vegetarian वगैरह ये सब बनना पड़ेगा, and they start advertising their abilities through Puranas and all that stuff, and they provide services, various kinds of educated services to newer elites.
So
In
this
fact,
happens during just Ashoka, right? Not during Chandragupta Maurya.
Chandragupta Maurya did not solidify it that badly. Okay, although my understanding is they were Jains or something.
No,
Okay,
that was after his retirement.
that was after his retirement.
But
Then
at least,
whatever, Ashoka embraced Buddhism early on. Now
yeah,
I
yeah.
am not very well aware of what Ashoka and these people individually did. I'm telling you about the social history.
Oh,
Matlab, one thing that changed during Ashoka's time was there was a imposition of the anti-Brahmanical rules in society.
but Chanakya was a clearly Vedic Brahmin, right?
Now there is a thought, and this is where it gets a bit, I rely on the latest Indological research,
Hmm.
and I know that a lot of people will disagree with me.
Hmm.
For some people, the Arthashastra was written much later, after
Okay.
Ashoka,
Okay.
because they're saying that Ashoka, Chandragupta, these people could not really follow any of the tenets or dictats of the, the Arthashastra,
Arthashastra. Why?
because their polity was fundamentally different. It was very Buddhist. It was very inclined towards asceticism and all that.
Oh,
But ये state control वगैरह, ये state control था, but that was an evolution. So there is this whole thesis by some people. I keep forgetting the name. I'll try to send it. Now again, many of your viewers may not like what I have to say, but what I'm saying is Brahmins were master propagandists. Okay.
okay.
They were very educated. They were the elite class in terms of brains and stuff. So they advertised their services heavily, and they
Okay.
became like. And Chanakya ka bhi, according to Johannes Bronkhorst, is a myth. Chanakya is not a real character, or even if he was a real character, he was incorporated into the myths. Like, yeah, dekho, it's very unreliable. The dating of this stuff, and it's all happening 300 BC, 400 BC, etc., or a bit later, maybe 200 BC. So it's not the most clear part of what is happening. But ho kya raha hai ki Brahmins are emerging, particularly around 200 BC or so. They are emerging very fast. In fact, Ashoka's dynasty is ended by a Brahmin. Okay, so the thing is that it has nothing to do with Hinduism or Buddhism. What Brahmins do is they adopt certain aspects of Buddhism. They become ahimsavadi and all that stuff, and they become very they slowly come closer to power again. पहले उनको Alexander आके, basically that region was destroyed a bit, so he migrated towards the eastern parts, the Brahmins. Now east में चले गए, वहां पे बुद्धिस्टों का राज है अभी. The Buddhists are reigning, but Brahmins keep providing services for the lower orders. Brahmins provide services for many newer entrants to power, like Shaks and Huns and other kinds of people. Brahmins were pro-immigrant also in a way. Okay,
Yeah,
so
always.
and in a way also very strangely, so somebody asked who gave land grants. Timurids. No, Timurids did not give land grants, but many smaller landowners, zamindars, this and that, many of these people, they were giving Brahmins land grants well into the 1700s and 1800s. Okay, can I just pause 1 sec?
Yeah. Okay. Kashyap is saying,
Yeah.
did he say Chanakya was a myth? Yeah, depends
He may
on.
not have been a myth like that, like may have been a real character, but what I'm saying is the timing is off. ये वो लोग Johannes Bronkhorst बोल रहा है. ठीक है. I could share materials. I would suggest Neerajan start a Telegram channel where we could actually share academic materials, perhaps. I
That's
don't
going
know.
to be infiltrated by some TMC who will advocate for violence against Muslims, and I'll be fucked.
Okay, or no, maybe you could do one of those things where you shared the materials and people could just receive them en masse. Oh,
Right.
admin only, something like that.
Okay.
Whatever, up to you. Just an
Yeah.
idea. Again, I told you nobody will agree with me. So
No,
I am
what
just
was how much of there is an academic consensus on the idea that Chanakya is a myth? Because I've heard that argument as well. Is that a mainstream view?
no, that is not the most mainstream thought, because Johannes Bronkhorst's thesis itself came out in 2007.
Okay.
And Johannes Bronkhorst is he's also fighting a bit of a battle with the Indologist himself.
Okay.
But I think that the reason I rely on somebody like him is he's a senior Indologist, and number one. Number two is this actually helps us. He has a book called How the Brahmins Won. Okay. And this book is very useful for us to understand why Brahmins can be compared with gentry and other caste, other status groups of the world. And this will only help us. If you keep denying that Brahmins had any power whatsoever, or other things, then that is where we lose the battle. You can't deny it, because somebody from some place will say, ye to bahut 10 sources hai ki saying that Brahmins were oppressive. Khatam. You have to say that, bhai, yes, I'm not saying they were oppressive or good or bad and all that. Don't go into that. Were they powerful, yes or no? Yes, they were certainly powerful. Oliver and others say that they adopted certain aspects of Buddhist to become powerful. Wo bhi hai. There is a nice trend of thought in Indology which confirms these thoughts and things. Adhish Sathai, his work on Vishwamitra shows that as the Brahmins became more and more powerful, they became a closed status group who advocated for endogamy, so that they have less, don't allow anyone into their caste too easily. Okay, allow hota, but less easily than before.
Yeah.
Okay, so these things happen. And honestly, these guys are working with the Bhandarkar Oriental Research Institute, and also they are not the most unreliable people. They are also, they're famous Indologists, the people I'm talking about, Timothy Lubin and all these people. Now, ye land grant ka system क्यों interesting है? Because land grants that began around, even if you take the Buddhist thing, then quite far back, like Mauryan Empire, 300 BC and all. और बाद में आता है 300 AD से ये सब more or less is land grants are being given to many Brahmins, because many small rulers are coming up and Brahmins were given land grants, and they were doing services for these kings and lords and whatever. और ये trend continue होता है. I can trace it in Bengal till 1700s, 1800s even.
Yeah, I have a Brahmin friend who she says that her surname was not always Bhomik. It became Bhomik because they received land grants. So I'm guessing Bhumi diya इसलिए Bhomik surname बन गया.
हो सकता है. Yeah. There are many of these things, and don't go into too much. ये Brahmin ने वो किया, वो Brahmin क्या था and all that. See, basically, a lot of people even entered the caste. It wasn't always like so closed and this and that. Okay, like don't go into the very very nitty gritties, or Chatterjee can't read that script, Banerjee can read that script. वो सब उतना, don't go into all that. Understand that they were creating their power structures, and they were like the British gentry, in a weird way. Okay. जैसे British gentry owned land and became a powerful status group because of the land ownership. So Brahmins also had power. Not every Brahmin again, but some Brahmins did.
Yeah.
Okay.
Some jatis within the Brahmin Varna did.
Yes.
Were the Brahmins supposed to be landowners though? It's being asked by Jen Wallace.
They were landowners. This is well documented in all the land grants till Mollo Rajas in Vishnupur, who gave many land grants. Like in Vishnupur is one interesting part. So this is what used to happen. If you study Vishnupur from 1600 to 1800s, the Mollo Rajas, who were tribal kings, suddenly started claiming that they were Rajputs. Okay, they were descended from Rajputs in Western India.
Yeah,
and बोल रहे थे कि भाई कैसे होगा? So they invited a ton of Brahmins who came there, and they built a bunch of
made up the genealogy.
Yeah, and they gave them a genealogy, nice as genealogy. And Brahmins ko they gave tons of land. Vishnupur has a huge Brahmin population right now. But till the 1600s, that wasn't the case. They were planted there.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that in a negative way. They just gave them land and inko service diya bas khatam.
That is the point. People need to people have sort of a PTSD, of course, from historians using history always as politics. We are not doing that here. We are not saying anything which is being said to say that person was bad or the descendants of that person.
Landowner ho to tum evil ho gaye. So by that logic, today even I owned a tiny bit of land. So I am evil to everyone who owns that less than 500 square feet of land.
Yeah.
मतलब मेरा 500 square feet है, तुम्हारा 200 square feet है. तुम by default good, I am by default evil.
Yeah. There are
होता है ना.
There are 3-4 types of people on the caste conversation side. One who says that it was all rigid and evil Brahmins were going around oppressing all the top three varnas were going around oppressing all the fourth varna and fifth panchamas.
Yeah.
And
I would even urge you guys to think outside Varna, because Varna is totally useless beyond the early medieval period. Varna system जो था वो Veds में था, वो अलग चीज ही था पूरा. Jatis were actually Buddhist in their orientation, not even Buddhist.
Here comes the politics.
Society में आ जाता है.
Here comes the politics that the left, whom we are basically talking about, their intention is not to solve the problem, right? Their intention is to blame Hinduism or the country in general. Therefore, they are finding out any instances of any seeming oppression. So they'll go back to Varna as well and Rigved. So therefore, one side says that it was all rigid as fuck. All the top three Varnas were oppressing everyone from the fourth and fifth Panchamas, and that's going on today. Their descendants, all of the descendants of these people all have similar lineages. No one ever had any caste mobility. There's one section on the right-wing side who says that yes, they agree, all those bad things happened, and it was good that those things happened, and they should happen even today. That's a crazy fractional minority, negligible minority in the trad side. There's a trad side who says that yes, caste and jati is great thing, but the bad behavior stemming from jati is bad thing, and we also oppose that. Then there is one section who is saying that caste was nothing but class, and there I think is a big pitfall that is waiting to happen. If caste is equal to class becomes a consensus, then we are just waiting to be fucked by leftists again in the narrative war and the academia, because there are going to be huge examples where varna was or jati was not just class. Economic class did not matter. So we need to get to how and why and observe and even point out that caste was just status group,
so an
not
interesting
class.
way to think about caste versus classes, and this Weber gives us very well.
Yes.
Is that look at the British nobility. The British nobility, not Queen Elizabeth and all, weren't the richest people in Europe, right? In England, even, right? But they had way better respect, prestige, honor in society, and they would not marry just anyone. They had to marry only within royalty, right? तो ऑनर मेन था. ऑनर है तो तुम्हारा स्टेटस है सोसाइटी में. तुम किसी को भी शादी कर लोगे, पैसों के लिए भीख मांगोगे, नहीं होगा. Lottery, you can win the lottery today. Let's say you win the lottery. I hope you do.
Does that mean I get to marry Anushka Sharma?
Bengal's economy is in shambles, so let's hope you win the lottery tomorrow and you earn 10 crore rupees, right? Will you enjoy the same power as somebody like Shubhendu Adhikari or Abhishek Banerjee or somebody does? I'm not saying you are worse than them.
I know. Not even do I get to marry. Not even do I get to marry Ambani's daughter.
Ambani छोड़ दो, तुमको CPM का नेता भी बेटी नहीं देगा. हाँ, because they will probably be more concerned with their caste identity and वो जो status है उनका.
Yeah, I personally know CPM people who don't let their descendants marry into lower castes.
Precisely. और यही है, this has nothing to do with Hinduism. This has everything to do with power. तुमको power मिल गया ना, you will first thing, and तुमको जो 1 करोड़ रुपया मिला और 10 करोड़ रुपया मिला hopefully, what you will do is you will bring up your children in the best schools and colleges and feed them caviar and all that in restaurants. वो भी एक generation में वो भी वो हो जाएंगे, elite class हो जाएंगे. वो भी सबको शादी नहीं करेंगे. Okay. And that is precisely how caste worked, and that is why Hitesh Ranjan Sannal, Declan Quigley are so relevant. The fight has always been to become a dominant caste.
And actually, not many people have understood what we tried to say when we said that Bengal is the most caste society. See, the word caste is so convoluted. In one context, when we say the word caste, we mean the traditional Jati Varna society. On the context of that video where we said that West Bengal is the most caste society, we meant caste in that evil way that leftists use the word against Hinduism. In that way, West Bengal is the most caste society, because regardless of whether CPM CPM supporters or CPM party workers are mainly Brahmin or not, that is secondary. The main point is that is also a very Brahmin oppressive caste endogamous sort of a group, even similar to Brahmo Samaj, who are oppressing people who are lower in status to them. It just happens to be that they are also Brahmins. So why ignore that casteism?
Precisely, and look at it this way. देखो Brahmin में भी there was a huge variety of professions, right?
Exactly.
So the Brahmins who are poor priests. So priests में भी variety है. Temple priests are powerful. Not all, again, not all are powerful and rich, but जो लोग temple में, मतलब imagine the priests at some huge temple like Kashi Vishwanath, let's say, हाँ, or Tirupati, हाँ. Imagine the power that priest has. और अभी इमेजिन करो जो तुम्हारे घर में आके वो नित्य पूजा करके 2 फूल चढ़ा के जाता है, हाउ पावरफुल इज दैट गाई, राइट? सो ये प्रोफेशन की वजह से होता है. इवन इमेजिन द ब्राह्मण जमींदार्स एंड द ब्यूरोक्रेट्स हु टुक ओवर बिकॉज ऑफ देयर लैंड ओनरशिप एंड ऑल, or cultural capital. ये लोग, these were more power. Somebody like Rabindranath Tagore, even though he's a Pirali Brahmin, he's a landowner, so he has tremendous power during the colonial period, right? He and his whole family, they dominate Calcutta society. और ये लोग Pirali Brahmin है, इनके साथ normal like respectable Brahmins don't give them their daughters.
And incidentally,
But they enjoy crazy amount of power.
No wonder was Rabindranath Tagore's compositions also treated as outcast. Maybe because he was also a literal outcast, and his works were also treated as outcasts by people who are all the legit Brahmins.
Precisely. He was not allowed to be called a Brahmin, but ये लोग वो भी देखो पैसे से ना सब होता है. Now today in today's society, आज छोड़ दो, maybe even in the 1960s, imagine you were born then. And you were born as a relative of Tagore's, people would think you are a genius or something, right? Like ऐसा ही होता है. Society was never static. People with money and power change things, right? And that is how it works, and Indian society is no exception. So that's what I wanted to add to Dr. Dey's presentation, that देखो ये जो, if you read Patrick Olivelle and many other good Indologists, and I'm not saying they are not political or they are not assholes, but इन लोगों ने काम किया है. जैसे Patrick Olivelle takes out ये डुओ का concept है ritual pollution, ritual purity. तो बोल रहा है ritual purity क्या होता है, शुचि और शुचि यही तो होता है ना, जो संस्कृत वर्ड है. बोला कि उससे कास्ट में कोई आता ही नहीं है, मतलब शुचि और शुचि डज नॉट फीचर मच इन द पुरानिक लिटरेचर एंड ऑल दैट. और पुरानिक लिटरेचर भी क्या है, पुरानिक लिटरेचर, इमेजिन दैट टुडे कांग्रेस पार्टी रोट अ हिस्ट्री बुक, राइट, व्हेन इट केम टू पावर. और उस हिस्ट्री बुक में क्या किया, नेताजी, भगत सिंह, सावरकर सबको निकाल दिया, अंबेडकर सबको निकाल दिया. ओनली गांधी यू विल रीड इट एंड थिंक मुगल, then British, then Gandhi, and Gandhi is the greatest gift we ever had, right? तो भाई हिस्ट्री बुक क्या हम अब से लिख रहे हैं, हिस्ट्री बुक हम कब से लिख रहे हैं? Puranas mostly served as history books. If you read the genealogy sections, वो भी रोमिला थापर बोल रही है. And again, let's use the left and its research, right? तो रोमिला थापर बोल रही है कि Puranas are genealogical texts, they have historical data in them. इतिहास पुराना are history. So वो history book तब लिखते थे. Now imagine if you are the king and you sanction a history book, would you write really negative stuff about yourself? You'd write the most positive, awesome stuff, right? If you made a temple, you'd say this is the greatest temple in the world. If you had a Brahmin friend, you'd say अरे ये तो Brahmin सबसे highest Brahmin है, और वो Brahmin खुद ही लिख रहा है. तो वही मैं बोल रहा हूँ that let's not, like, this is why we have to think beyond Portuguese terms like caste. We also have to think beyond ये जो what the British made us think, that earlier society was very stagnant. जो Chatterjee था, 50 generations ago they were Chatterjees. 50 generations ago whatever his generations, whatever his whatever great to the power 50 person did, वो अभी भी कर रहा है. 200 years ago they were doing the same thing. No. 1000 years ago Brahmins had a different status, other castes had a different status, many, and even under the Mughals what they did was they allowed zamindars to have a ton of power, right? So zamindars used to do land grants and do all that stuff. Status, ये जो कास्ट जाति सिस्टम है, इससे बहुत लोगों को फायदा भी होता था, गरीब लोगों को, because it was an aspirational model. You told them भाई तू काम कर, पैसा निकाल, मैं तेरे को बना देता हूँ क्षत्रिय. Now everyone claims to be क्षत्रिय. जिसको भी थोड़ा बहुत पावर या पैसा मिलेगा वो ब्राह्मण को पैसा देता है, बोलता है यू आर क्षत्रिय, wow, everyone in like India में अगर क्षत्रियों का तुम सेंसस करोगे, like I think if 10% are Brahmins officially claim to be Brahmins, उसमें भी 5% official है. Vaidyas claim to be Brahmins, for example. Caste claim to be Kshatriya. What the most numerous caste. So ऐसे बहुत कितने क्षत्रिय तुमको मिलेंगे. The Motuas claim to be Brahmin, Vaidyas claim to be Brahmin, Rajvanshis claim to be Kshatriya, Kayastas claim to be Kshatriya as well. Pondro Kshatriya Ponds, a lower caste in South Bengal, they claim to be Kshatriya. Okay. कोई भी कुछ भी claim कर देता था and Brahmins were like, भाई ठीक है. You know.
This is what a lot of people still refuse to understand. Everything works on incentives and aspirational fucking models. Today your aspirational model is to walk around in a Hawaii chapel and sound subaltern. So you are trying to do that as a commie. Kanhaiya Kumar is showing off that how poor he is. His parents live in a dilapidated house. Trump is showing off that he has 50 wives. That is the aspirational model in USA.
Precisely. और ये देखो मजे की बात देखो. Caste has never really changed. The jati thing, jati छोड़ो, status has never really changed as a concept. So if Brahmins earlier got land grants, right? तो तुम पढ़ाई किए हो, so you do the service to some zamindar or king. They're like, ठीक है नीराजन तुमको 3 एकड़ जमीन दे देते हैं, चलो. And you are happy, your son is getting it, your grandson is getting it, your these that. उन्होंने कोई काम नहीं किया, they are just getting it because they are born as your son or grandson, right? तो अभी भी reservation का तो same logic है. Because you were born to a certain family, you are entitled easier access to a government job compared to others.
Exactly. And this is where I think
उन्होंने क्या किया? They just flipped the script.
Absolutely.
You have to flip the script.
Yeah.
So they just said, भाई ब्राह्मण हो तो तुमको land grant मिला ना कुछ सालों से. Nice. Now that I am Dalit or whatever I claim to be oppressed, or whatever there's a history I can manufacture or think of, तो अभी मेरे को मिल जाएगा. Simple. Now, should we hate it? We should think of it like the upper caste got outmaneuvered because they failed in they became commies and they allowed it to happen. And they failed many a times to become, understanding of. And I won't blame upper caste for always the plight of the lower caste. That is rubbish. Okay, many times they were helpful as well, including Ambedkar, who was helped by an upper caste. वो बात नहीं है. बात ये है कि भाई तुमने एक टाइम में पॉलिटिक्स खेला, तुमको फायदा मिला कुछ. हाँ, अभी ये लोग पॉलिटिक्स खेल रहे हैं, इनको फायदा. सूरज यंगरे is writing fictional crap and getting हार्वर्ड का पोस्ट डॉक. तुम नहीं कर पा रहे हो. ये तुम्हारा फेलियर है बेसिकली.
that just inverting 180.
तुम्हारा आधे लोग तो कॉमी बन गए, आधे ब्राह्मण तो कॉमी बन गए.
But that's only in West Bengal.
अलग बंगाल में है, नहीं बाहर में है. तुम what do you think दिव्या द्विवेदी is?
These are different phenomena. No, West Bengal has a history of commie.
West Bengal में और ज्यादा है.
Yeah.
और also Brahmin dominance भी ज्यादा है और बहुत ज्यादा है.
Yeah, Bengali Brahmins beat everyone to the party basically.
Precisely.
And so flipping the script 180 degrees on the Brahmin and Kshatriyas and let's say the top 3 varnas.
Yeah, that's what Ambedkar did.
And that is, I think, the main problem why the evil behavior will not go away, because
नहीं होगा.
No matter what your job.
अभी SC/ST Act earlier it was sometimes it was illegal to abuse a Brahmin or a king or Kshatriya or whatever. Right? You can't go to UP and say अरे यादव लोग सब कुछ whatever dash है. You can't say that. They will beat the crap out of you. Same thing now. You can't say it to Dalits. Same thing.
So I think.
So
that's
what.
So I think what Narendra Modi is doing in terms of breaking the idea of who is the dominant caste in a particular state, that works to a certain extent. But the main solution absolutely has to be market. No other way.
It is the long term. उससे तुमको reservation से कभी कोई फायदा नहीं मिलने वाला है. Reservation will reproduce the same structure always.
Absolutely.
और भी ज़्यादा करेंगे. Look at Japan. Japan kind of pseudo solved the problem, and I think you could address that issue later some other day, because Japan में जाएंगे तो बहुत कुछ बोलना पड़ेगा. Or frankly, I think that my knowledge of Japan is not that very good, right? So let's see if I can try and get some work thesis on Japan. But इतना मेरे को पता है कि they gave like the government does not recognize your caste, right? in Japan.
But
And
Japan again, I have a problem with comparing anything of India with such tiny countries, because anything is easy to solve in a tiny
nahi, but
country.
Japan, why Japan is relevant here as far
Hmm.
as I heard कि देखो जैसे हम लोगों ने लोग को आइडेंटिफाई करके बोला भाई तेरे को नौकरी मिलेगा
हाँ.
क्योंकि तेरा एंसेस्टर ऑप्रेस था, राइट?
Hmm.
अभी जापान में क्या क्या बोला ही नहीं, किसको किसका कौन कौन ऑप्रेस्ड है, क्या था, कुछ नहीं.
That is one
उनका
idea.
जगह गए, स्कूल कॉलेज बना दिए, रास्ता बना दिए, मॉल मॉल वॉल बना
Yeah.
दिया, बोले कि भाई तुम बिजनेस करो, अच्छा हो,
Hmm.
ये करो वो करो, बस खत्म.
Actually, we did that as well to some extent, societally ground up, and we did reservations. Because what Ankit Shah was
There's-
saying in my
yeah,
live stream, that he didn't even know what was his caste, etc.
yeah, it doesn't always like, वो भी एक और है कि we exoticize ourselves too much. हाँ.
And that's the
I'll
same thing
yeah,
that happened when I asked the AI engineer friend of mine what was his caste. He kept saying general. I'm trying to understand what's his varna, what's his jati. He doesn't even know. He's saying general.
no, exactly the problem that we have exoticized ourselves too much. Okay, ये ब्रिटिश ने जो सोचा, we agreed on that and we actually perpetuated those for more than half a century. So यही है, मतलब problem ये है, but I see hope, you know, it's not always all bad and wrong. There can be, but the intellectual, the level of discussion must be at a higher level.
Yeah.
ये वो मेरे को गाली दिया था, वो उसने खराब किया, I don't care honestly. Everyone, whoever's got power, they abuse it. Okay, it's not new, it's not a, you know, the worst story in the world.
Yeah.
और अभी वेस्ट में जो कर रहा है, they are writing books where they call Brahmins as Nazis and all that stuff. ये this rubbish, absolute rubbish. I don't know when the government of India will wake up. Okay, God knows. हाँ. और एक कैलिफोर्निया वगैरह में हिंदूज आर एक्चुअली प्रोटेस्टिंग अगेंस्ट दिस स्टफ, बट वो दे विल नॉट फंड अ गाय लाइक सैल्वाडोर बाबोनेस हु मे ट्राई टू डू समथिंग.
We must
But
awaken our
the
Kshatriya
California
spirit.
Hindus, they will come together for their garden parties and discuss their sadness, और
No,
millions of dollars
actually
लेके वो कुछ नहीं करेंगे.
they'll fund temples as well in USA. They'll fund temples.
और
They'll
फिर
show.
वो टेम्पल में कोई शूट आउट हो जाएगा, फिर वो rubbish. Anyway,
Yeah.
forget all that. I am anyway. I came here because because Dr. Dey's conversation provided such a nice basis for for the clarification that I thought I provided.
Yeah.
That ये अच्छा था, मतलब I think we could continue what he, you know, said.
Yeah.
And I'll take your leave now.
Yeah.
I think, you know, anyway we'll
Yeah.
come back with the BJP manifesto thing
Tomorrow. Yeah.
uh,
Okay. Bye bye,
Congress
guys.
or
Good
not.
night. Yeah. Good night, Mr. Sociologist.
So, yeah.
Good night, everybody.